So basically, this is the goal of this session. Let's just a few words about me. So my name is Iva Bersat, and I'm a business application consultant at Sword Group, based in Switzerland. So my focused areas are like Microsoft 365, Azure, Dynamics 365, and Power Platform. So I'm doing a lot of development and functional consulting. So basically, I have the two sides. I've been awarded Microsoft MVP last year in the Office Development category, which is my main contribution are based on SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, and everything related to Microsoft 365 development. I'm also a Microsoft certified trainer. And as I said, so I'm focused on Microsoft 365 and Azure development technologies like SharePoint Framework, Teams SDK, TypeScript, React, .NET Core, and so on. So every stuff related to Microsoft 365 and Azure development is a passion for me. So basically, I'm from this side, the development, and I move a little bit in the functional consultant. So for today, 3 objectives. You will get an overview of Power Automate and Logic App capabilities. And after, we will go through the differences between Power Apps and Power Automate, and Logic Apps. And I have prepared a little demo to highlight the main difference in practice. So I've provisioned some Logic Apps in Azure, and we'll show you mainly the big difference on how to manage them. Right, the agenda. Just a quick introduction on Power Automate Logic Apps first. After, I go through the differences. So we will go for licensing, creation, how to create each Logic App and Power Automate stuff, restriction, limitation, trigger types, connectors, error handling, and right after, just a quick demo. And we will go for some question at the end. If you have some question, feel free to put them in the chat. I will review them just after the session. So Power Automate first. I will go really quick because maybe in the previous session you get everything about Power Automate, but Power Automate is inside the Power Platform, is one of the 4 pillars, and it's everything related to process automation. So basically in the Power Platform, you are building some application in low code, no code with Power Apps, and just after building some apps, you create the automation with Power Automate to automatize your business process and so on. So basically, Power Automate is inside the Microsoft Power Platform. It's one of the 4 pillars. So basically, the key features of Power Automate, you can automating repetitive tasks. For example, you can send automatically some emails. You can create some items in SharePoint list based on some triggers and so on. So basically, you have a lot of common business case. You can guide a user for a process with business process flow, but this is really related to Dynamics 365 CRM. You have multiple external data source connection, for example, ServiceNow. You have a lot of other external connection capabilities, and basically you can make some automation, desktop automation with Power Automate Desktop and RPA. So basically, this is the main values of Power Automate nowadays. And basically, in Power Automate, you have some pre-built templates. So basically, if you want to start an automation for a template, you have multiple templates available. You have more than 400 connectors at the moment. So basically, you have third-party tools, you have all Microsoft 365 connectors. So basically, you have a lot of connectors available to directly connect your data sources. Basically, it's fully integrated inside the Microsoft 365 ecosystem with Azure, Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and so on. So basically, this is really a large scope. And you can access on-premises data sources if you want, like if you have SharePoint on-premises, SQL database on-premises, you can through the Azure, the data gateway. So you have the capability to connect to your on-premises system through the data gateway. Now, Logic App. This year I'm focusing on Logic App because I guess you saw a lot of things related to Power Automate because you have a good understanding right now, but Logic Apps is really the main topic. So, but basically in Azure Logic App is an integration service. So basically, as you see on the screen, it's in the integration section. So basically, this is not really different from Power Automate, but in Microsoft Azure, this is an integration service. Power Automate isn't an integration service, basically. And the capabilities. So basically, you have a user-friendly designer, which is really similar to Power Automate. I will show you in the demo. You have the maybe one of the main difference is there is a different set of triggers and action from Power Automate. For example, the Azure Sentinel connector is only available inside Logic App. You can't use this connector inside Power Automate. So you will see there is some difference in the connector. But the main goal of Logic App is to build complete integration solution. So basically, I will describe you this a little bit later, but a Logic App is more focused on integration. When you want to integrate data from big external data sources, when you want to trigger based on a lot of events in Azure, and you want to come back, for example, inside Microsoft 365, and you come back to Azure. So basically, it's for integration solution. And you have advanced tool capabilities integration like Azure DevOps, monitoring stuff with application insights, and so on. So basically, you have advanced capabilities with Logic Apps than Power Automate, as you will see in the demo and in a few slides later. And you have the Visual Studio Code integration, and inside Visual Studio Code, it's inside my demo. So you will see you have two extensions, and you can manage directly from Visual Studio your Logic Apps. So basically, you can create new project and deploy directly for Azure. And you can edit and check some configuration directly from the Azure portal. So you have multiple ways to interact with the Logic Apps. But the first difference is the licensing model. And this is a big topic because right now, the Power Automate licensing in a summary, you have multiple scenarios, but the most common is mainly Microsoft 365. So basically, you can use Power Automate inside your Microsoft 365 licenses. It's included, but you will be restricted to the standard connector only in the context of Microsoft 365. So for example, if you want to make some automation with SharePoint Online, Microsoft Teams, it's included inside Microsoft 365 licenses. And you have access only to the standard connectors. Be careful. You don't have access to the premium. For Dynamics 365, it's really like Microsoft 365, but it's included. In this case, you have access to the standard and premium connectors, but only in the context of your CRM or ERP apps. So for example, if you have licensing for marketing, for finance and operation, and so on, if you are creating some automation in the context of all these data entities, for example, if you access data entities in CRM or ERP, you can directly use Power Automate. It's included inside your licenses. You have also some capability with Power Apps per user and per app plans. So basically, in this case, it includes every flow inside the context of your Power Apps application, and you have access to the standard and premium connectors in this case. And after, we have maybe the most focused Power Automate plans with the per user plan. The Power Automate per user plan with attended RPA if you want to use Power Automate desktop. And at the end, maybe the most with a high performance profile. I will give you some information about this just after. Power Automate per flow plan, and you pay for up to 5 flows with a high level of performance. And if you want to add multiple other flow upper to 5 flows, you will need to pay. So basically, you have 5 flows in a higher profile, performance profile. And after, if you want to add more flow on this high performance profile, you need to pay. So basically, this is a summary of the Power Automate licensing at the moment. But this is a big topic. I'm just putting this summary, and in some context, maybe you will have question on this. It's always a big question because sometimes you need to really investigate to get the right answer because myself, I have some experience because I'm working with a lot of customers, so I can answer you. But some people, some of my customers are asking every time, can I do this if I have this kind of licenses? So, for example, this is every time a big question. So for logic apps, it's a little bit different because you pay only for what you use. So basically, it's based on your execution and consumption. So you have a per action billing system. And if I resume, make a summary, you have two plans for your workflows, the standard and the consumption plan. Sorry. The first, the standard, you will get a dedicated instance and you run multiple flows. In the consumption plan, you don't have any dedicated instance and you can run only one flow. This is one of the main difference. In standard plan, you can run multiple flows, you can create multiple flows, and in consumption, you have only one flows per consumption plan. And after, you have some metrics based on which action you use and which feature you are using. So, for example, some metrics are the standard and enterprise connectors execution. If you are using integration service environment, if you are using integration accounts, and all of these metrics, you have multiple metrics will give you the billing. And basically, the standard is for people who want to create multiple workflow because you can create multiple ones. And if you just go for a consumption plan, you will run only one flow. And for example, you have additional metrics, for example, the data retention, which is not included in the consumption plan. So basically, you need to pay for the capacity of the data retention and so on. So basically, you have more metrics for the billing in the consumption plan than the standard. But you will see there is some difference between these two plans. It's not the same. So as you can see, Power Automate is more like per user licensing. So you assign some license to your user, and Logic App is more like you pay only for what you use. So it's like every Azure services, you pay only what you use inside the services. Next, creation. How to create some flows between Power Automate and Logic App. So basically, really simple, as you have seen in the past session. In Power Automate, you have the Power Automate portal. Based on your localization, you will have a different URL. For example, in my case, it's EMEA, but in my case right now, it's switzerland.flow.microsoft.com. Basically, this is a Power Automate portal to create your flow. And inside other Microsoft 365 services like SharePoint and so on, you have directly integration with Power Automate to create some custom workflow. For example, if you want to create a custom workflow for upside join inside SharePoint Online flat architecture or like this. So you have some services in Microsoft 365 that allows you to directly click on a button and create some custom workflow directly inside Power Automate. For Logic Apps, it's a little bit different because it's not inside Microsoft 365, it's in the Azure portal. So you have portal.azure.com. Inside the Azure portal, you will have a code and designer available. So the designer is to check your flow and edit it with a friendly user interface. And you have the code editor. So behind a Logic App, you have JSON code, and basically you can edit it through Visual Studio or directly inside the Azure portal if you want. And inside Visual Studio, it's the same. You have two Logic App extensions. I will show you why two and not one, because you have two plans, and basically you have two extensions and one per plan. You have also the code editor and the designer, but the designer has some restriction. Basically, you can, for example, edit directly inside Visual Studio Code a Logic App. This is not available. You can edit some parameters, but not the whole Logic App like in the Azure portal. So in a summary, that's the main differences for the creation methods and how to manage the Logic Apps and Power Automate Flow. Now, big topic, but I will go for a summary because if I want to provide you a good demo, I need to go a little bit quick. But restriction, as I said before, Power Automate has now performance profile. So based on your user license, you will have more performance or less. So basically, if you have, for example, the per flow plan in Power Automate, you will get the highest performance profile. In Power Automate, the flows configuration is fully managed by Power Automate. So for example, you have no advanced configuration. For example, you can't maybe manage scale up, scale out, but in Logic App, you can. You have no Visual Studio Code integration in Power Automate, so you can't edit this flow inside Visual Studio Code, for example. For Logic App, in Visual Studio Code, I will show you the code. You have the code editor, which is fully functional, and the designer. Okay, you can edit a few things, but you can't edit the whole Logic App, the whole parameters, as you can make inside the Azure portal with the designer. And the consumption plan has some big restriction because the standard plan has the full capabilities and the consumption plan has a little bit more restriction. So as I said before, you can run only one single workflow per plan. So one plan is equal to one flow. The default configuration is fully managed by Logic App, but in the standard plan, you can edit because behind the standard plan, you have an app service plan and you can edit the configuration. You can scale up, scale out if you want. And in the consumption plan, you can't. So basically, the standard has the full capabilities and the standard, the consumption is limited. And for example, you have no application insight integration for advanced monitoring, for example. So this is a limitation based on the consumption plan. Now some limitation because each services has some limitation. So for example, it's an example of some of the most common limitation, but the number of flow owned by a single user in Power Automate is to 600. In Logic App is 1000 per region and per subscription. So you see there is a difference because in Power Automate you have a fixed number for a single user, and in Logic App it's per region and per subscription. So basically, if you have multiple subscription, you can have up to more workflows. The action per workflow is the same. You see, this is a common parameter. The run duration, for example, in Power Automate is up to 30 days, and in Logic App, for a stateful flow, you will have to 90 days, and for stateless, it's only 5 minutes. So I will show you the difference because stateful is for running like a long workflow and stateless is for quick workflow with a quick action. And for example, the asynchronous outbound request in Power Automate can be up to 30 days, and asynchronous outbound request in Power Automate is around 4 minutes. So basically, each service has some common limitation and some difference between them. So basically, this is a big topic because in some case, some customers have limitation in this particular context and other have some other restriction. And each time it's a mess because I need to check every licensing model and so on. So basically, this is also a big topic with licensing. And Microsoft has published a big documentation on the limitation and restriction on each service. I will show you just an overview of all this documentation, but you will see you have a lot of limitation and restriction. So basically every day maybe they are adding some new restriction and so on. So basically when you have new features, you have also new limitation and so on. But this is a quick overview of maybe the most common limitation inside Power Automate, sorry, and Logic Apps. Now, trigger types and connectors. So basically, between Power Automate and Logic Apps, you don't have the same trigger types. So basically, in Power Automate, as I mentioned before, Power Automate is more focused on personal productivity, application development with automation and so on. And maybe Power Automate has more simple trigger because you have, for example, the Power Apps trigger to trigger flow inside your Power Apps. You have the Microsoft Forms, you have the SharePoint one, Microsoft Teams, you have the Azure DevOps, you have the Planner, OneDrive, Dataverse, Flow button, and so on. So basically, you have every single trigger related to Power Automate, personal productivity, business scenarios, simple business scenarios. Because in Logic App, as I mentioned before, it's an integration service. And in this case, when you are building some solution for complex integration purpose, basically you need, for example, Azure Blob Storage, Azure Function, Cosmos DB. You need to maybe make some HTTP request. You have, for example, SFTP, SQL connection. So basically, in Logic App, you have more advanced trigger with the most maybe common integration and data management service inside Azure. As I said before, Azure Cosmos DB, Event Hubs, for example, if you are using Azure Event Hubs, and so on. So basically, it's more advanced and it's more focused on the Azure integration services and data management. But you have the same connectors as Power Automate, and in Logic App you have a little bit more connector, like Azure Sentinel, for example. It's only available inside Logic App, and for each connector you have a compatibility. So for example, a connector is only available in, for example, Power Automate, and some connectors are available in Power Automate and Logic App, and some connectors are available inside only in Logic App. So basically it depends on the connector. This is for connector types. You have multiple categories, and it's common between Power Automate and Logic App. So for example, the standard connectors. In Power Automate, you have a difference because in Power Automate, you have non-premium and premium connectors. So based on your license, you will have the capability to create connectors in the premium or non-premium category. So basically, the standard connector example are SQL Server, SharePoint Online, Outlook, FTP, and so on. And inside Logic App, you don't have this distinction in non-premium and premium. This is only in Power Automate you have this distinction. It's a class of the connector. Basically, based on your license, as I mentioned, you can use this premium connector or not. You have on-premises connectors. And just a keep reminder that on-premises data gateway is a premium feature in Power Automate. As in Logic App, it's not, you don't have any premium class connector. In this case, for example, it's SharePoint Server, MySQL, file system, you have SQL Server, and so on. So this is on-premises connector. You have integration account connector, ES2 encoding, ES2 decoding, if you know this kind of stuff. Enterprise connectors, which are, for example, SAP, IBM, and you have a lot of enterprise connectors. And based, as I mentioned before, based on the usage of this connector in Logic App, you will be billed. So basically, if you are using enterprise connector, it's not the same price when you are using only standard connector. So basically, you have a different billing between the connector types. And at the end, we have the ESE, Integration Service Connector, with Azure Blob Storage ESE, SAP ESE, and so on, for those who knows about integration service connectors. This is for the connector types. And remember that inside Power Automate, you have in the connector class, and based on your license, you can use non-premium or premium connectors. So in Microsoft documentation, you have some connectors references, and as you can see, for example, I've get some connectors. So the first one, Azure Sentinel, is only available inside Logic App. You have the Logic App icon. The light means that this is a preview connector. So Azure Sentinel is a preview connector only available in Logic App. And for example, Azure Queues is available inside Logic App, Power Apps, and Power Automate. And you see the diamond means that this is a premium connector for Power Automate and Power Apps. So basically, inside Logic App, there is no limitation between, there is no difference between premium and non-premium, but in Power Automate and Power Apps, this is a premium connector, and that requires a specific license. So be careful. This is the main topic because, for example, some of my customers are asking me, oh, can I use this connector based on my license? So you need to check. So this is a really great work because you need always to check. So on my side, I'm always checking this kind of references because if I want to answer my customers, this is sometimes it's a mess. So this is the connector references on Microsoft Docs. So you will get all this information. You can see the class of the connector, the regions available. You have the service. So for example, the Azure Queue, you see in Logic Apps, this is a standard connector, but in Power Automate and Power Apps, this is a premium. So basically inside Logic App, there is no additional licensing model. So just use this connector and you will be billed based on the usage. And in Power Automate and Power Apps, it's a premium. So it requires additional licensing. In the category I mentioned before, so for example, per user plan, if you have a per flow plan and so on. And the Logic app, for example, Azure Sentinel is only available as a standard connector inside Azure Sentinel. So this is on Microsoft Docs. Error handling. This is pretty simple, but basically inside Power Automate, you have the flow checker. And in Logic app, you have the same kind of feature, but in the designer, it's just a check of your parameters. And inside the code editor, you will have a validation of the syntax. So basically, you can't publish a new flow if you have syntax errors or like this. So basically, it's a little bit different. In Power Automate, it's more like user-friendly because you have a user interface with error warning and so on. In the Logic app designer, you have also some user interface warning error and so on. So this is user-friendly. And in the code editor, sometimes the error messages are not really relevant. So basically, be careful. If you are not familiar with the syntax of the Logic app JSON code, be careful because you can break the whole Logic app. Some of my customers have broken the whole Logic app when they wanted to edit the code, for example, in Visual Studio and so on. So sometimes you can break everything and you need to recreate it. So be careful of that. This is a common scenarios in my experience. And basically, inside Logic app, you have the same kind of feature like Power Automate, so the run after, the settings. Basically, if you want to have advanced setting on each actions, basically this is the same behavior. There is no really big differences between this kind of category. Error handling is not really a big topic in the difference of these two services. Now, live demo, because I have half an hour. So basically, I will show you a lot of things because this is the purpose of this session, more live. So basically, just before starting, performance profiles, as I mentioned. So you see in Power Automate, you have now performance profiles based on the license. So basically, you see, you have the plans. For example, you have 3 performance profiles. So basically, the low, medium, and high. The high, you see, if you have a Power Automate per flow plan, you will have the highest plan performance profile. Sorry. So in this case, you will have it's basically it's a performance profile. You have better latency and so on. So basically, you have a stronger performances for your flow because some of my customers are using Power Automate per flow plan to run some big flows with a lot of connection with external services, custom connector, and so on, and they need a really strong profile. As you see, medium is for example, you have Power Apps Plan 2 per user plan, Dynamics 365, for example, and the low performance profile is for free plans, Microsoft 365. If you are using just Power Apps and Power Automate inside Microsoft 365, you will get the lowest plan in terms of performance. So be careful. Sometimes the flow needs to have more performance. So basically, with a Microsoft 365 standard plant, you don't have so much performance. For example, all trials inside Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365, and so on. So this is really important to understand if you want to have more performances on your flow. Choose, for example, if you have really strong flows to run with a lot, for example, of custom connectors with some external APIs, when you want to make some data transaction between some services, consider using Power Automate per flow plan. This is my recommendation. And on this, you see, you have a strong documentation from Microsoft. You have all the limitation and restriction. So basically, you see, you have a lot of restriction for Pro action request. You have a runtime endpoint, gateway limits, HTTP limits, timeout. Timeout also, it's a big point, message size, and so on. So basically, Microsoft has a strong documentation on restriction and performance plans. You have the same kind of pages for Logic app, But inside Logic App, in terms of performance, you don't have so much limitation because in Azure, it's you need to you are built on what you use. So basically, if you need more performance, so you pay for it. So basically, it's not the case inside Power Automate because depending your license plan, you will have some limitation on the performance. This is not the case in Azure Logic App. And if you are using, for example, the standard plan, you can use scale up and scale out. So basically auto scale, and based on some rules, you can make some scale up, scale down, and scale out. For those who don't know how to check the license plan inside Pro Apps, you have just in the settings, you have plans. And in this case, you can see which is your license assigned. So in my case, for example, I have the Pro Apps for Office 365. So basically, this is inside Microsoft 365. And based on this information, you can check the performance profile for your flow. So in my case, I will get a low performance profile. So you need just to check it before running some big flows and some advanced workflow, not like just a personal productivity flow. And in my case, if you just want to automatize some basic thing with just SharePoint Online, maybe Outlook, and so on, the low profile is enough. But if you want to really go through advanced scenarios with maybe Dynamics 365, for example, finance operations, CRM, and maybe some other Azure services and external services or APIs, consider maybe medium or highest plan because you will get some limitation. Right now, Power Automate, as I mentioned before, and you have seen a lot of demo relating to this. You don't have the capability to manage the configuration. So basically, you create your flow, and he will run. So basically, you have a lot of different kind of flow. You see, you have the desktop flow, you have the business process flow, and so on. So basically, there is no advanced configuration inside Power Automate. This is not the case in Logic App because I'm switching inside Azure. I have a resource group I have provisioned some Logic App with different plans. So in my case, I have the first plan is the consumption plan, and the other plan is the standard plan. So basically, you see there is some difference because in this resource group, I have an app service plan, which is used for the standard plan because I can, in the backend, you have an app service plan, you have the application insight instance for my standard plant, and you have some API connection with SharePoint Online and a storage account. First, I will go through. So basically, the difference when you create a flow inside Power Automate, it's pretty simple. You have a menu and you choose which kind of flow you want to create, for example, instant flow, and you create for this process. Inside Logic App, it's a little bit different. So sorry. For example, if I take the consumption plan, you can run only one flow. So in my case, you see, you have only one option, use the Logic App Designer. So in this case, I can create more than one flow. And in this case, if I check the Logic App Designer, I will redirect to this kind of user interface. You see, it's really similar to Power Automate. So basically, you have the same user interface. But in my case, for example, if I add a new step, you have more connectors. So basically, for example, the standard connector are not the same inside Logic App. So you see, for example, you see, you have, for example, blob storage, you have Azure Key Vault, you have a lot of other connectors and in some different categories. So basically, you see, you have enterprise connectors. As I mentioned, you see SAP, IBM, and so on. So basically, this is not the same connectors. And in this case, you have a lot of other connectors, but the user interface is the same. You have also the code view. So as I mentioned before, you can edit. You see, you have the definition, the JSON definition of my Logic App directly inside the portal. So basically, I can edit it and so on. In this case, you see, I can't edit. It's just a code view. In the consumption plan, you can edit. Basically, in this case, I can't edit. It's a read-only. Oh, no, sorry. It's not. No, you can't edit. It's in Visual Studio Code. You can. Sorry. in the portal you can edit. So for example, you can edit, you can discard, and so on. So you can go back to the designer just here and so on. For the trigger, if I delete this one, for example, if I delete this trigger, you see, you have different types of trigger. As I mentioned before, you have also some other categories, but in this case, inside Power Apps, you have basically SharePoint, Power Apps, and maybe other. But in Logic App, you have all the Azure services like Event Grid. For example, if I search for Azure, you will see there is a lot of Azure connector. You see, you have Cosmos DB, App Service, Azure Application Insights. You have a lot of different connector from Logic App, and these connectors are really here for to help, well, in my case, my customer to create some advanced and complex integration scenarios with some Azure services. If you have SQL database, they want to make integration when you are building a modern data warehouse with, for example, data lake, with blob storage, and so on. When you want to create a integration solution between all these Azure services, and in case when it's really complex and advanced. So this is what you can do. You have versioning system in Power Automate. This is a little bit different because in this case I have multiple versions of my Logic App. In this case, the connector are called API connection. So you see your SharePoint connection. In this case, it's an API connection. You have the workflow settings if you want. You have also identity. For example, if you want to use manage entity, when, for example, you want to use a role-based access control. In Power Automate, you don't have this kind of feature. In this case, I can use a manage identity for this Logic App. This is really interesting when you want inside Azure, you want to use role-based access control and so on. And basically, you have other stuff. But in this case, it's not the full capabilities. You have just a limited set of feature. And now I will show you now the standard plan, which is the full integrated, and you have the full functionality. So in this case, you see it's really simple, but you have more option. The first is you see the scale up and scale out. So basically behind every standard plan for a Logic App, you have, you see, app service plan. In my case, it's a Windows OS, but behind you have app service. And as every app service in Azure, you can, for example, use the scale up, scale out if you want to scale automatically based on some rule and some based on the request on your Logic App, you can scale up, scale out, scale down, and so on. This is really interesting if you want to control everything, because in Power Automate, as I mentioned before, you don't manage anything. Inside the consumption plan, you have some parameters, and inside the standard plan, you manage everything you want. So basically, you have a dedicated instance based on an app service plan, and you manage what you want. So basically, it's really interesting when you want to create strong workflow with a strong performance profile and so on. In this case, you see, I have a workflow menu because in this case, I can add more than one. In the consumption plan, I have only one workflow per plan. In this case, I can add one. In this case, you see, I have stateful and stateless. So basically, stateful is for long run, when you have workflows that, for example, with approvals and multiple steps, and when you have some state and so on, and you have stateless, which is optimized for short run of flow, less than 5 minutes, for example, when you are dealing with IoT, for example, Azure Service Bus or so on, when you want to have some short run of your flow. This is the difference between stateful and stateless. In this case, you see, I have just one flow, but I can create multiple, and I can't, in the consumption plan, I can't have more than one. You have the connection. This is the same name. You have connection reference, API reference, and one of the most important feature, maybe, if you are a developer like me, the deployment center. And basically, in the standard plan, you can, for example, manage the code of your Logic App inside, for example, Azure DevOps. This is a good practice. So for example, you see, I can select my organization, I can select a project, and basically I can use Azure DevOps to manage the versioning of my Logic app. If you want, for example, to use, for example, Azure Pipeline to deploy automatically your Logic app, or if you want just to use the service plan builder, if you want, this is what you see. For example, in this case, you can use app service build service, which is integrated inside the app service plan. It's not the case because you don't have any deployment center in the consumption plan. So this is a added feature when you are using standard plan. You see, you can use Azure Pipeline or Azure App Service build service. So this is the add. You have application insights for advanced monitoring because we are using app service behind the standard plan. So basically, you have advanced monitor feature. You don't have this kind of monitoring features inside Power Automate. You just have limited. For example, in the Power Platform Admin Center, you have some metrics, but with application insights, you can create your own rules. You can create your own report and so on. So basically, this is more advanced than Power Automate. You have also the manage identity. See, you have a principal ID. You can assign permission. You have, if you want to manage the TLS and networking and so on. So you see, advanced feature than the consumption plan. And for example, inside the workflow, this is the same than the consumption plan, but you have just a dedicated section. You can see the code and the designer. So for example, you have the same designers as a consumption plan, and this is the same designers than Power Automate. If you are making, for example, moving from Power Automate to Logic App, I don't see any problematic topics because this is the same user interface. You won't be lost, I guess. And you have access key if you want to generate access key. This is how to manage an overview inside the Azure portal, sorry, and inside Visual Studio, because it's important to understand how in Visual Studio it works in Visual Studio, sorry. Basically, you can install 2 extensions because you have 1 extension per plan. So for example, you have the Azure Logic App consumption plan and you have the Azure Logic App standard plan. This is 2 different extensions for Microsoft. So in my case, I have the Azure module. And so, for example, you see, I have the Logic App extension. And in my case, for example, I will check this subscription. And you see, I have my standard plan in this case. And you can expand your plan and you will get your workflows inside, for example, my demo workflow. So basically, you see, you have the code. If you want to use the designer, you can, but there is some restriction. So in this case, I can only, for example, see some settings, but in my case, I cannot edit the whole Logic App. So basically, I can, you see, you don't have any add action button and so on. So in Visual Studio Code, it's pretty limited. It's maybe only for those who are dealing with JSON code and are really fluent with the syntax of Logic App behind the scenes. So basically, this is only for developers. And you see, you have a lot of options. You can manage the application settings if you want. You have the connection, parameters, file logs, and so deployment if you want to integrate with GitHub, for example, to deploy for GitHub. You can connect directly to GitHub repository, sorry. And this is for standard plan. You have also another connector, which is Logic App, but consumption plan. You have 2 extensions. In this case, you have the same features, like for example, but in this case, you see, you don't have so much option. You have only only the runs, the run on the triggers and the version. So basically, you see in consumption plan, you have just a few settings, as in the standard plan, you have multiple functions like configuration, logs, you can connect to GitHub, you can manage your flow. And in this case, sorry, it's pretty limited, but for example, you can also open the editor if you want, and you can open in the designer. But in this case, as you can see, this is really in read only. So basically, you just see the the flow architecture, but you can't edit. You can't add some action directly from Visual Studio. So this is really a feature for developer and who just want to check, okay, I've created this action, and behind the scene, they are developing custom JSON code to create the action, create the trigger, create the connector, and build the whole logic app with code only, JSON code only. So in this case, this is how to manage directly inside Visual Studio. And in this case, if you are using, for example, Azure DevOps, so basically if you are developing for JSON your logic app, you can directly, for example, in this case, I will show you, you have, for example, you can create a new project. When, for example, you are a developer, you just want to create a logic app with JSON code, and you understand the syntax and so on. So you can create directly a project inside Microsoft. So basically, you see, you can directly generate a brand new logic app project, and this will generate some files for you. And you code your function in JSON, you can check the result, and just after, in this case, you can deploy. You can directly deploy a new logic app, for example, a standard plan, consumption plan based on your needs, and you can deploy directly. So, or if you want in the standard plan, just create a workflow. So in this case, you can create directly inside Visual Studio just one additional workflow. And after you publish this workflow inside the portal, and after you can check it in the portal, you can run it and so on. So basically, Visual Studio is more like for developers, and as in my experience, some guys aren't really they don't understand really clearly the JSON format and the JSON syntax for logic app, so they just use the portal. And some advanced developer with some skills in JSON and Azure services are just using Visual Studio, or the both. It depends, because I know some developers are using just the portal because they don't really understand how it works in Visual Studio. They don't really like Visual Studio code and so on. So basically, this is the most important thing to see inside. For example, I will come back to the standard plan. You have, as I mentioned before, for example, you have more workflow settings. So basically, as I mentioned before, in Power Automate, you don't have this kind of settings, and inside Logic App, you have advanced feature relating to workflow. So basically, you can see allowed inbound IP addresses, you can restrict, and you can use an integration account if you want. So basically, you have more advanced feature for managing your workflow execution. In Power Automate, this is really standard, simple. You are just creating your flow, and everything is managed by Microsoft in the behind the scenes. But inside Azure Logic App, you have really more advanced settings, and this is really interesting because in some case you really need to update this kind of settings. So for example, the managed identity. So for some customer who don't want to have a high level of security inside the company and so on, so they want guarantees about the security, about the workflow execution, the access control, and the IP addresses and so on. So basically, Power Automate, remember, you have limited ways to configure the flow runs. So basically, you just create a flow, and Microsoft is managing everything behind the scenes. In Logic App, it's really more advanced. In the consumption plan, you just run one workflow, but you don't have so much parameters and setting. But in the standard plant, you have to configure what you want. So basically, if you want to scale up, scale down, you want to restrict and so on, you can. This is maybe the most important differences, because yes, there is 10 minutes left, because maybe you have some question. But this is an overview of the differences between Azure Logic App and Power Automate based on some of my experience, because I have some experiences with some customer, and in this case, I showcased maybe the most important parameters I see in the past. It was really important for everyone who want to, for example, create Logic Apps and make the transition, because some of my customers are starting from Power Automate, and for example, they are understanding a little bit more Azure, and they see, you have Logic App, which is the same, and they are maybe making some transition between Power Automate and Logic App. This is not this is a common scenario between Power Automate and Logic App. So, for example, some customer are making the move. So I guess I finished to show you a lot of things, but maybe in this case I can stop presenting and just check the question, maybe, if there is some question.
Yeah, thank you very much, Yves. Yeah, I think we've had a couple of in already.
Okay, so I will check. And now about the API call per month. Oh, so basically Azure Logic App is per action. So basically each time you use an action inside the flow, it's billable. And you have more metrics like integration service, integration account, and so on. So basically this is per action billing, sorry. It was per action and more metrics. So basically, but the API call per month depends on how many actions you have, for example, in your flow, and every action is billable. What does in the context of really mean? In the context of, it depends. But the context is really important because sometimes, as I mentioned before, you have some big parameter to consider. So based on the business case you want to achieve, there is licensing problem, you have limitation, you have restriction. And for some of my customer, using Logic App is really important because they can use scale up, scale out, scale down. And in Power Automate, you don't have this kind of feature. So based on your business case and what you want to achieve, it will depend on what to consider between Power Automate and Logic App, consumption, or standard plan. So this is what I mean in the context of a customer, of a project, or so on. Some parameters will impact the decision of using Power Automate or Logic App. It will depend. I hope this is clear. I think that the number of calls increased recently. It's you pay only for the it's a per action. So basically, you pay only for the number of action you are executing inside the Logic App. Can I create a Power Automate? Can I create a Power Automate flow with a team member license? Team member, team member in Dynamics 365, yes, because but only inside in the context. If you have just a Dynamics 365 license, it will be restricted to the only in the context of Dynamics 365. So basically, team member license is related to Dynamics 365, and in my licensing recap, as you can maybe remember, it's only in the context of your Dynamics 365 entities and so on. Is number to Power Automate on by single increase to 2000. I did not remember that the own, but basically inside the Microsoft documentation is always it's nowadays it's 600. I didn't remember if there is an increase. If your experience, a simple Logic App with a few actions in custom plan, how much it will cost in a monthly basis? It's difficult to. Basically, some of my customers have like, for example, in terms of cost, if you are using consumption plans, if I remember well, for basic, for really simple Logic App with some few action, it could be like $20 per month, and for more advanced scenario, it could be maybe 100 on 150, depends. But in basic scenarios, it could be like 20 or 50 $50, between 20 and $50, depends on what you call as action. So basically, if you just use a SharePoint Online and for example blob storage or standard connector, it will not really be a big billing, but in some case, be careful, because with enterprise connectors or custom APIs and so on, you will have a big bill at the end of the month if you are. Great presentation, thank you. Great, thank you. Is there a license plan for development environment? Is there a cost? Maybe you have logic apps and a dev test price, if I remember well. Maybe if you a good way is to go to the Azure calculator sometimes, and you just check. For example, if you have logic app, you have all the metrics. So if you want just an overview, and in this case, for example, for a consumption plan, yes, for example, you have dev test pricing, but you need to have an agreement with Microsoft to use this kind of pricing. But you can have really good price with dev test pricing. If you want to check, you go to the Azure calculator, and if you just have to, for example, consumption plan, you check how many action per day. For example, if I have some, for example, this kind of action, you see, you have this kind of price. But remember, a good thing, in consumption plan, you have the first 4,000 action free. So basically, this is not like the standard plan. In the consumption, you have the first 4,000 action free. So basically, if you have really basic flow, it will be free. Thanks a lot. Okay, perfect. Recap free for those months. Okay. I hope I've answered every single question because I've checked it really quickly. So perfect. I'm done. If no more question. Maybe. Okay. Example. I'm checking the example. Okay. You post. Oh, this is really simple because in this case you have only like 3 actions. Per month, always per month. So per month you have 4,000 free action per month.
Okay, I think that is everyone's questions. If anyone got a new thing. Yeah, I think that's everyone. All right, well, thank you very much to you. That was another great session.
Thank you very much for having me.
So you're very welcome. Okay, so next we have a special session, our